Welcome to Finding Holiness, where we delve into timeless Torah wisdom, revealing the sacred in everyday moments. Join us on a journey to elevate your spirituality and discover holiness in every aspect of life. I'm your host, Rabbi David Kadosh, and together, let's embark on a path of spiritual exploration. I hope you enjoy this next episode. Okay, everybody, we are in the final hours of Tisha Be'Av, otherwise known as the final hours of the entire Ben HaMetzarim that began 3 weeks ago with Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. Last Shabbat actually, just a couple of days ago, we read Parashat Devarim, which our Chachamim always say falls before Tisha Be'Av. And Parashat Va'etchanan, which we're going to read next Shabbat, is always the parasha that falls after Tisha Be'Av. In the words of the Tur, the famous Baal HaTurim, Tisha Be'Av Kodem Va'etchanan. That's a rule. So however you want to work out your calendar, Tisha Be'Av needs to be before Parashat Va'etchanan. They were arranged, the parashiyot, by Ezra Sofer to make sure that the annual cycle of festivals and historic events fell in certain times. And Ezra Sofer decided that Devarim needed to be before Tisha Be'Av and Va'etchanan needed to be after Tisha Be'Av. And why is that the case? Why is that the case? So, one of the answers that's given by the Levush, the author of the Levush, his name was Rav Mordechai Yosef. He said, I quote, Ve'atam, the reason why we read Devarim before Tisha Be'Av, hu kedei shikru parashat Devarim mitchilat betochechotav shel Moshe kodem Tisha Be'Av. We want to read the rebuke of Moshe Rabbeinu before Tisha Be'Av, kedei leaftir ba bechazon shehi tochachat al churban, in order that the haftarah that is recited on Parashat Devarim, which was again yesterday, Chazon Yishayahu, is the tochacha, the rebuke that was given to Bnei Israel as a result of the Churban, what came prior to the Churban. In yesterday's parasha, Moshe Rabbeinu said, Echa esa levadi torchachem u'masachem veribechem. How can I bear your trouble? How can I bear your burden and your quarrels, your fights alone? How can I do it alone? And we read Haftarat Hazon prior to Tisha Be'Av because it contains the prophet's rebuke related to the Churban. Chazon Yishayahu ben Amos asher chaza al Yehuda v'Yerushalayim. And of course, we call it Shabbat Echa as well because in the Haftarah it says Echa hayita lezona. And then of course today's Megillah that we read, Echa yasheva badad. I want to elaborate a little bit on the connection between these two rebukes, the Tochacha of Moshe and the Tochacha prior to the Bet HaMikdash. There's a midrash in Megillat Echa that says a very powerful statement. It says, Ilu zechitem, had you been victorious, then hayitem korim b'Torah Echa esa levadi. You would have just read Echa esa levadi, the parasha of Moshe that we read yesterday in Sefer Devarim. Ve'achshav shelo zechitem, but now that you were not meritorious, as a result, harei atem korim Echa yashva badad. Now you're reading the Megillat Echa, the destruction of Yerushalayim. So you didn't attain the proper zechuyot needed had you listened to that of Moshe, the rebuke of Moshe. So we actually have an explicit connection between the rebuke of Moshe, Echa esa levadi, the lamentation of the poet, of the divine poet regarding the Churban Bet HaMikdash, Echa yashva badad, and the implication is, had we just listened to what Moshe wanted from us, then we wouldn't have sinned. The Beit HaMikdash would not have been destroyed, and we wouldn't have to recite every single year Echa yashva badad Megillat Echa. This is what the Midrash says. Ilu zechitem, aitem korim b'Torah Echa esa levadi. And but now that you didn't, so now you have to read Echa yashva badad. So according to this, it's a little bit obvious as to why Ezra Sofer instituted the parasha of Devarim prior to Tisha Be'Av, uniting the tochacha, the rebuke of Moshe Rabbeinu, and the tochacha of Yeshayahu Hanavi with the Churban. So the lesson is clear. Cha'asa levadi, listen to Moshe Rabbeinu. It's our obligation to re-examine the tochacha of what Moshe Rabbeinu wanted from us in Parashat Devarim prior to Tisha Be'Av, so that we will merit the building of the Beit HaMikdash b'Menav Yamin. But what is the connection between this tochacha, Echa esa levadi tochachem u'masachem, and the tochacha of the Navi, Echa yashiva badad? How would heeding Moshe Rabbeinu's rebuke have prevented the Churban of the Beit HaMikdash? What did Moshe Rabbeinu say that we needed to do that would have stopped the destruction? So, the Gemara Masechet Yoma tells us that the second Beit HaMikdash was destroyed as a result of Sinat Chinam, which is baseless hatred. And the Midrash says, Ilu zechitem ha'itim korim b'torah echa levadi. Had you been meritorious, had you had the zechut, and responded appropriate to Moshe Rabbeinu's rebuke, how can I bear your trouble? How can I bear your quarrels alone? Implying that you cannot fight with one another. That you should not have rivchem. Riv is a fight, is an argument. And rather, had you loved every single Jew the way you were supposed to, Beit HaMikdash would not be destroyed. Ilu zechitem, had you been meritorious. Ve'achshav shelo zechitem, but now that you did not merit to have that zechut, you didn't overcome the yetzer, the inclination to fight with your brothers and argue with your brothers. So it kind of makes sense over there. The problem with this explanation is the Gemara teaches explicitly that it was only the second Beit HaMikdash that was destroyed as a result of Sinat Chinam. The first Beit HaMikdash was destroyed because of the three cardinal sins of murder, immorality, and idolatry, and avodah zarah. Mikdash rishon mipnei macharav, mipnei shlosha dvarim shayu bo. Avodah zarah, gilui arayot, shfichut damim. Aval mikdash sheni, but the second Beit HaMikdash, shayu oskin b'torah mitzvot v'milu chasadim, mipnei macharav. Why was it destroyed? Mipnei shayita bo sinat chinam, to teach us that shkula sinat chinam keged shlosha averot, that the sinat chinam sin is equivalent to the three cardinal sins. So if that's the case, then we have a source that clearly states that it's only the second Beit HaMikdash was Sinat Chinam. In Rashi's commentary to the pasuk of Echa Yasheva Badad, in the opening pasuk of Megillat Echa that we read today, he states that Yirmiyahu Navi wrote the Megillah depicting the Churban of the first Beit HaMikdash. Yirmiyahu lived prior to the first Beit HaMikdash. That being the case, how can we claim that had we listened to Moshe Rabbeinu's tochacha, which had to do with loving your friend, okay, we would not be reading Echa Yasheva Badad. The first Bet HaMikdash was not destroyed as a result of Sinat Chinam, a basis hatred. It was destroyed as a result of the three cardinal sins. So with this, it's going to be our main question. We're going to come back to it at the end. We'll provide a little answer here, but we're going to go a little bit deep. The period of Ben HaMetzarim is considered to be only 21 days. The source of this is found in the first Haftarah that we read on the Tlata de Puranuta, which we read here in Parashat Pinchas. Also written Divrei Yirmiyahu ben Chilkiyahu. And Hashem says, Vayhi devar Hashem elai lemor, ma ata ro'eh Yirmiyahu. Yirmiyahu, what do you see? What do you see in your vision? Yirmiyahu had a vision, he had a prophecy. What do you see? And he said, Makel shaked ani ro'eh. I see a staff made of almond wood. This is what I see. Rashi quotes a midrash that an almond tree is unique in the fact that it completes its development during a 21-day period. That's all it takes, 21 days for an almond tree to develop. And that corresponds to the days, says Rashi, between Shiva Asar B'Tamuz and Tisha Be'Av. 21 days. Says Shiva Asar B'Tamuz was the day that the city was breached. It was the day the city was divided. And Tisha Be'Av, of course, was the day that the house was burned down. But the Mefarshim find this a little bit perplexing. After all, if you count, we all know how to count. If you count from Shiva Asar B'Tammuz to Tisha Be'Av, you actually have 22 days. It's not 21. It's 22 days. You have the last 13 days of Tammuz and the first 9 days of Av. So you have 22. So, why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu view Ben HaMetzarim as only 21 days? So the explanation, a lot of us know this already, hinges on the fact that Shulchan Aruch rules accordingly, En Omrim Tachanun B'Tisha Be'Av. We do not recite Tachanun supplications on Tisha Be'Av. En Noflim Apenehem. We don't fall on our faces. Mishum de Mikre Moed. Because Tisha Be'Av is called a Moed. It's called this holiday. And the Chachamim explain the rationale is, many of us are aware that according to most Mefarshim, Mashiach ben David was born on Tisha Be'Av, actually say by Mincha of Tisha Be'Av, which we're about to partake now. And therefore it's considered a Moed. It's considered a holiday of some sort. So we know now why Ben HaMetzarim is considered to be only 21 days, because the Moed of Tisha Be'Av is not included in the count. But it's a quasi-answer if you ask me, because we're still fasting. We are mourning. We're mourning in relation to the Churban of the Beit HaMikdash. So why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu sow Yirmiyahu Navi an almond tree, a staff made of almond wood, mind you, comparing the days of Ben HaMetzarim, which is 21 days, why not include Tisha Be'Av in the count, in the period of Ben HaMetzarim? So for this, we need to go back to the original Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. The original Shiva Asar B'Tammuz was one of the 5 things that took place on the 17th of Tammuz, was that Moshe Rabbeinu broke the Luchot. He broke the Luchot. And the Mefarshim explained that when Moshe Rabbeinu broke the Luchot, the letters of the Torah flew off. Okay? The letters of the Torah flew off the first Luchot into Shamayim. They were shattered. Once they were shattered, they flew away, whatever this means. And only 21 letters flew off the Luchot. Only 21 letters. Why? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not inscribe in the tablets the letter Tet on the first Luchot. The letter Tet was not written in the first Luchot. That's what the Gemara says in Masechet Bava Kama. So therefore, the days of Ben HaMetzarim is 21 days, corresponding to the 21 letters that flew away into space, scattered in Galut, in exile, due to the shattering of Luchot. But Tisha Be'Av corresponds to the letter Tet. Tet is 9. And that remained untainted. And therefore, in fact, the letter Tet actually suggests that everything is contained within. From outside, it looks bad, but the letter Tet, if you envision it in your mind, the good is contained within, and that's the Mashiach ben David, the birthday of Mashiach is found there, and that his arrival will reveal the true and goodness to the people of the world. So, HaKadosh Baruch Hu shows Yirmiyahu Navi a staff made of almond wood, symbolizing the 21 days of Ben HaMetzarim, excluding Tisha Be'Av. Says the Zohar HaKadosh the following: the 22 days extending from Shiva Asar to Tisha Be'Av, during which both Batei Mikdash were destroyed, was as a result of the 22 years that Yosef was in Mitzrayim. Yosef was in Mitzrayim for 22 years. He suffered 22 years not being able to see his father, Yaakov Avinu, because of his brother's sinat chinam, his brother's baseless hatred, which drove them into selling him into slavery. And that's what the Zohar says, that the inherent sinat chinam that we have, unfortunately still today, in Bnei Israel, was manifested by the original sinat chinam by the brothers towards Yosef. Torah tells us, Vayisneu oto. They hated Yosef. Yosef was a true tzaddik, Yosef a tzaddik. And consequently, HaKadosh Baruch Hu delivered Bnei Israel into the hands of Edom, Esav hu Edom. Edom also hates Bnei Israel without any cause, and they were the ones who destroyed the Beit HaMikdash, second Beit HaMikdash. Truth is, we have the same problem as the first time we explained this concept of Sinat Chinam. Sinat Chinam was only in the second Bet HaMikdash. Remember, we started off with that midrash that had the Jewish people listen to the Tochacha of Moshe, then you wouldn't have to say Echa. But now, again, Echa, the Megillat Echa was in reference to the first Bet HaMikdash. So, albeit the 22 days of Ben HaMetzarim relating either to the first Bet HaMikdash or the second Bet HaMikdash correspond to the 22 years that Yosef was in Mitzrayim, due to his brother Sinat Chinam. But how does this relate to the first Bet HaMikdash? So it turns out that even in the first Bet HaMikdash there was Sinat Chinam. Although it's very unknown. But the first Bet HaMikdash was Sinat Chinam. The Gemara, in fact, asks, Ubamikdash Rishon lo hava be Sinat Chinam? You mean to tell me, when the Gemara gave that famous statement that the first Bet HaMikdash was destroyed by the three cardinal sins, the second one Sinat Chinam, the Gemara says, you mean to tell me that there was no Sinat Chinam in the first Bet HaMikdash? I'm going to prove to you there was Sinat Chinam. Ve'aketiv, the Pasuk says, in Yechezkel, Megure el Herev hayu, et ami lachen sefok al yarech. Pasuk says, the dwellers of the sword were my people, therefore smite upon the thigh. Says the Gemara, what does this Pasuk mean? Amar Rabbi Elazar, Elu bnei adam she'ochlin ve'shotin ze im ze. These are referring to friends who are having meals and barbecues and going out together to lounges and bars, having fun. Ve'dokrin ze et ze bechorvot shebilshonam. And yet they stab each other with daggers of their tongues. Behind their back, when they're not looking, they're talking bad about each other. And they're insulting each other. And also, when they're together having drinks and barbecues, we're all buddy-buddy. But when they're on their own, behind the back, that's when the Lashon Hara is going to come out. That's a Sinat Chinam. So even in the first Bet HaMikdash, there was Sinat Chinam. Not only that, says the Kli Yakar, that the Sinat Chinam prevailed amongst the Jewish people during the times of the first Bet HaMikdash. That is what caused the Sinat Chinam, which was prevalent in the time of the second Bet HaMikdash. This is what he writes. Tisha BeAv haya maaseh meraglim. On the 9th of Av was the incident of the Meraglim. Bo bayom nolda midat sinat chinam midei be'Yisrael. It was on that day, on that infamous Tisha BeAv of the spies, where baseless hatred began. That was the first. The Pasuk says, because of Hashem's hatred of us, he thought that he'd take us out of the land of Egypt. The spies thought that God hated them. But when Rashi says Hashem really loved you, he was doing it for your good, and you thought Hashem hated you. So therefore, כי בבית ראשון היה שנאת חינם בין נשיאי ישראל, ובית שני פשטה הנגע בכל ישראל. And from that tragedy, triggered the negative characteristic of Sinat Chinam that led to the Sinat Chinam of the first Bet HaMikdash, which we quoted in Yechezkel, all those people having fun and barbecues and stabbing each other in the back with their tongues. And that was among the princes, the Nesiei Yisrael, the leaders of the Jewish people. And by the time that led and followed to the second Bet HaMikdash, it was widespread among everybody. Everybody now had Sinat Chinam. So, let's add a point here. While it's true that the first Bet HaMikdash was destroyed because they were guilty of the three cardinal sins, nevertheless, where were the princes of Israel? Where were the Nesim? Why didn't they prevent the people from performing the three cardinal sins? If you tell me that they're transgressing immorality and idolatry and murder, where are the rabbis getting up, the princes, the leaders of the Jewish people, and say, hey guys, enough? The answer is they weren't united on their own. They were stabbing each other in the back with their tongues. And therefore they were incapable of joining forces, incapable of coming together to influence the people of a generation not to transgress the three cardinal sins. And hence, this makes sense of the Zohar that we quoted, the 22 days of Ben HaMetzarim, whether it's related to the first Bet HaMikdash or the second Bet HaMikdash, that corresponds to the 22 years that Yosef he suffered in Mitzrayim due to the Shevatim Sinat Chinam, their baseless hatred. Sinat Chinam even prevailed during the first Bet HaMikdash among the princes of Israel. They were incapable of admonishing the Jewish people to become better and not transgress the three cardinal sins. And that Sinat Chinam of the first temple transferred its way into all of Klal Yisrael during the time of the second Beit HaMikdash. Because of that sinat chinam of the brothers, what ended up happening? That Hashem delivered us into the hands of Edom, who was consumed with sinat chinam towards, not themselves, towards the Jewish people. The Gemara tells us that the Khurban of the second Beit HaMikdash was by the Romans, was by Edom, and that's attributed to the wicked Esav. The Roman Empire was responsible for Galut Edom, the Galut that we still find ourselves in. In fact, this is apparent in a few places. One of the places is found in a Midrash in Esther Rabbah. Amra Knesset Yisrael Ifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Jewish people said to God, Ribono shel Olam, Ra'ita she'esav harasha ba'a be'atid la'chariv be'Beit HaMikdash u'mgale et Yisrael me'artzam. You saw that Esav harasha would come and destined to destroy us and the Beit HaMikdash and exile us. Gemara Masechet Gitin that says that when the evil Titus assaulted Yerushalayim with his army in order to destroy the Beit HaMikdash, Yatzta bat kol, a heavenly voice came down, ve'amra, and said, Rasha ben beno shel Esav harasha. Called Titus. Rasha, the son of Harasha, the descendant of Esav harasha. So we see that there's a clear connection. Edom, it has a sinat chinam. They're the ones that destroyed, of course, and there's sinat chinam towards the Jewish people till this day. And regarding the birth of Yosef, we find a pasuk, Vahi kasher yareda Rachel et Yosef, and it was when Rachel gave birth to Yosef, Vayomer Yaakov el Lavan shalecheni velecha al mekomi. All of a sudden Yosef is born. Yaakov Avinu goes up to Lavan, his father-in-law, and says, "Hey, buddy, see you later. I'm gone." What happened? What happened all of a sudden when Yosef was born? Yaakov says, I got to leave. Rashi answers this, and he says the following, that once the nemesis of Esav was born, Yosef, we're going to see, is the nemesis of Esav. The pasuk says, Bet Yisrael lehava, the house of Israel is a fire. Bet Yosef, Bet Yaakov esh, ubet Yosef lehava, the house of Yosef is the flame. And Bet Esav lekash, and the house of Esav is the straw. Fire without a flame does not have an effect on a long period of time. So once Yosef was born, the flame, Yaakov trusted in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, says Rashi, and he wanted to go home. Yosef was born, I know that I'm going to be protected from my brother Esav. So we see we have an explicit sort that Yosef HaSadiq represents that fiery flame that will burn this evil klipa of Esav, which is compared to straw, which is compared to kash. And in fact, there's another fascinating keta brought down by Rashi from the Tanchuma. Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz megurei avi be'eretz Kenan ele todot Yaakov Yosef. Look what the Midrash Tanchuma says. Vayeshev Yaakov, on the word Yaakov dwelled, that there was a certain linen merchant whose camels entered the town laden with linen, all full of linen, pishtan all over the place. And the blacksmith asked, where can he possibly store all this linen? There's just too much. What are you going to do with it? So one clever person says, the Midrash says, Nitzotz echad yotze mimapuach shelcha shesoref et kulo. One spark from your bellows, the blacksmith, he was telling the blacksmith, can burn it all. So what's the nimshal? What do we learn from this? Says the Midrash, Kach ra'a Yaakov ra'a kol ha'alufim ha'ketuvim lemala. At the end of Parashat Vayishlach, there's a long list of Esav and the chieftains of Esav. Aluf this guy, aluf this guy, aluf. And you're reading this, and Yaakov Avinu says, Tama ve'amar mi yachol lichposh et kulan. How can I conquer all of these? Look how many there are. Maktiv lemata, ele toledot Yaakov Yosef. You want to know how you're going to be able to conquer all of Esav? Ele toledot Yaakov Yosef. Yosef ve'aya bet Yaakov esh, bet Yosef le'ava. Yosef was the flame. Bet Esav lekash. Nitzotz yotze me Yosef shemechale ve'soref et kulam. One spark emanates from Yosef and can burn everyone. So this actually explains the Zohar that we quoted before, that sinat chinam triggered the ancient sin of the brotherly hate, vayisneu oto, that led to the sale of Yosef into slavery. And because of that sinat chinam, the brothers themselves were unable to exploit that power, that innate power of Yosef, that flame that was able to incinerate the negative powers of Esav like straw. And therefore, the opposite happened. Esav exploited the force of fire himself and came and burned the Beit HaMikdash. On that same pasuk in Parashat Vayeshev, going a little deeper now, the Midrash says, Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz megurei aviv. Again, right after the listing of all of Esav's sons and grandsons, so on and so forth, the Midrash says, Tenei, learn, kinuso ve'kinus banav hitzilo meyad Esav. His gathering and the gathering of his sons is what saved him from the hand of Esav. The gathering of the 12 Shevatim that was led by Yaakov Avinu himself saved the Jewish people from Esav, saved themselves from Esav. What does this mean? Immediately after the Torah chronicles the birth of Binyamin, which completes the 12 Shevatim, the Torah tells us, Vayu b'nei Yaakov shenem asar. And the children, the sons of Yaakov were 12. Then the Torah goes on to list the children of Esav. Ve'ele toledot Esav hu Edom. These are the offspring, the descendants of Esav. He is Edom. And in that long parasha, the Torah lists 11 chieftains of Esav that descended from Esav. Ele alufe bene Esav. There are 11. These are the chiefs of the sons of Esav. Why does the Torah enumerate all of these alufim of Esav? Why do I care? Does it matter? Did anyone even know who they are? Other than that one, those 3 minutes that we're reading it on Parashat Vayishlach, no one even looks at that stuff. No one even reads the commentary. What is going on over here? Why does the Torah feel the need to, I need to know who the descendants of my enemies are? Do we care? So I read an answer that maybe it's as if HaKadosh Baruch Hu intentionally positioned the births of the 12 Shevatim of Yaakov Avinu opposite the 11 chiefs of Esav from the beginning. And he wanted to inform us that there are two distinct sets, two groups that exist in this world. There is a camp of Kedusha, which is represented by Yaakov and his sons. And then there's the group or the camp of Tum'ah, of impurity, that is represented by these 11 chiefs of Esav. They are the leaders of the nations of the world. They don't believe in spiritual goals. They don't believe in Hashem or Torah, or mitzvot, or morals, or good things. For them, it's all about materialism. It's all material wealth. It's meaningless whims of olam hazeh. That's what the 11 chiefs of Esav are. So the 12 tribes, the 12 Shevatim, that comprise this group of Kedusha, correspond to the 12 combinations, permutations of Hashem's name. His famous name is Yud, and then Hey, and then Vav, and then Hey. It's a 4-letter name. And you are able to rearrange those letters into 12 different ways. It also corresponds to 12 different months. We actually say that in the Yehi Ratzon of Rosh Chodesh. We actually say that. And this is what gives strength and power to this group of Kedusha. Correspondingly, you have this group of Esav and his chiefs of 11, because there are 11 forces of Tumah. Chachamim explain that we find 11 curses in Parashat Kitavo that begin with the word Arur. Not the main curses that are like 3 columns long, but there are 11 curses that begin with the word Arur. Ra'iti be'yisodot shel Rabbi Moshe Ardashan, Yud Aleph Arurin yesh kan. That's what Rashi brings down the parasha. There are 11 arurs. Now, truth is, count them, you're going to count 12. It's like people forget to count. You're going to count 12. So he says, the last arur asher lo yakim et divrei Torah azot, that's an all-encompassing curse that applies to anyone who neglects the Torah. And it appears that arur corresponds to Esav HaRasha. He's got 11 chiefs, but the last Arur, which is all the Torah, Arur, Asher lo yakim et divrei Torah, that's Esav. How do we subdue, by the way, these 11 forces of Tum'ah, of Esav? Well, we burn 11 spices of the Ketoret. Hatzori, Vatzipora, and Chelbena. That's why you're supposed to count them. There are 11, and that subdues all the negative forces. In fact, also, there were 11, HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded us in the Mishkan, that there are 11 panels of goat's hair on top of the Mishkan. Yerayot, Izim. There are 11 panels. Also corresponding to the 11 forces of Tumah. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu juxtaposed in the Torah the completion of the births of Yaakov Avinu's 12 sons with the generations of Esav to teach us that the combined force of 12 outnumbers and outpowers that of Esav. We are more powerful than the forces of Tumah, the 11 chiefs of Esav, led by Esav himself. We have 12 sons of Yaakov, plus Yaakov is 13, and then you have the 11 plus 1, which is 12. So we learn a very vital principle over here. The 12 Shevatim, which represent this combined force, this faction of Kedusha to negate and subdue the evil klipot of Esav, only stems from the ability that they are able to come together. They're able to be as one. That extra force is who? Is Yosef HaTzadik. Yosef HaTzadik is that extra force. He's the flame that's going to be able to burn Esav. He is that spark emanating from the house of Yaakov that consumes the house of Esav. But that's only on condition that what? That the 11 Shevatim are able to unite with Yosef to complete that Yud Bet Shevatim, those 12 tribes of Hashem headed by Yaakov Avinu. Only then do we have the power of those 12 combinations, the 12 permutations of Hashem's name, of Yud Kei Vav Kei, to subdue the forces of Esav. If the Shevatim are divided, if it's Vayisneu Oto, if there's hatred, Chas v'Shalom, then we lack that collective power to outnumber the forces of Esav, and the 11 chiefs of Esav went out. Chas v'Shalom. And that's the meaning. Vayeshev Yaakov, the Midrash says, Kinuso ve'kinus banav hitzilo miyad Esav. There has to be the kinus of Yaakov, the gathering of Yaakov, and the gathering of all his sons that are going to be able to outnumber Esav and be saved from the power of Esav. In fact, Vayeshev, the word Vayeshev, Vav is Vav's and, but then you have Yud Shin Bet. Yud Shin Bet is a gematria 312. 312, which is the same gematria of the name of Hashem times 12. 26 times 12 is 312. Vayeshev Yaakov, kinuso ve'kinus banav. It has to be everyone together, all 12, that we can use the power of Hashem's name to defeat the Koach of Esav. So now we actually have a greater understanding of the teaching of the Zohar. Like we said at the beginning, the sin of the Sinat Chinam in the two Batei Mikdash, that triggered the original sin of the brothers, the brotherly hatred which impelled them to sell Yosef into slavery. And as a result, there's now this fight between Yosef and the brothers, and Yosef, being Esav's nemesis, is unable to light that flame to burn Esav. We don't have the full combination of all of Hashem's name. Esav is outnumbering us, and that's the reason why we are in Galut and still in Galut, and that's the reason why the two Batei Mikdash were destroyed. That's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu created these days of Ben HaMetzarim, 22 days corresponding to the 22 years that Yosef was in Mitzrayim, apart from Yaakov, deprived of seeing his father's face. Beautiful, beautiful chidush. And in fact, if you look deeper into it, you can find something else amazing. We said that Tisha Be'Av, really there were 21 days, right? We said there were 22 days, but Tisha Be'Av was the 22nd day, and the 22nd day is really a moed. And that's why it was not included in the official 21 days of Yemei Ben HaMetzarim that Yirmiyahu saw in his vision of the staff made of almond wood. Because Mashiach was born on that day, like we said. So if you pay close attention to the Yosef story and the brothers, when we examine the 22 years that Yosef was by himself in Egypt, we find something fascinating. During the first 21 years, Yosef was completely separated from his brothers. Brothers were with Yaakov, shepherding, Yosef was by himself. During the 22nd year, remember the 22nd day is the Tisha Be'Av day. During the 22nd year, all of a sudden something happens. What happens? The brothers come down to Yosef in Mitzrayim with Binyamin, eventually with Binyamin. So the 12 Shevatim were reunited again in the 22nd year with Yosef. And although that union wasn't complete because Yaakov Avinu was still by himself in Eretz Canaan, but there was a minor tikkun there. There was a rectification in year number 22. The 12 Shevatim, corresponding to those 12 combinations of Hashem's name, were reunited. Based on what we're saying, we can appreciate how HaKadosh Baruch Hu orchestrated events over here. And he arranged for Yosef to reveal his identity to his brothers in that last year when they brought Binyamin to them in Mitzrayim. And that revelation came about after a very face-to-face confrontation between Yehuda and Yosef. Yehuda, beginning of Parashat Vayigash, Yehuda pleads with Yosef to return Binyamin to his father. Vayigash elav Yehuda, vayomer bi Adoni, yedaber navdecha davar beoznei Adoni, ve'al yicharapcha be'avdecha ki chamocha kefaro. Tells Yosef right into his face, you are like Paro, the way you're talking, the way you're acting, the way you're behaving. In the Midrash, when this encounter associates the meeting with a pasuk in Tehillim that we recite every Monday, is a Shir Shel Yom. Ki hine hamelachim no'adu averu yachdav, hema ra'u ken tamahu, nifhalu nechpazu, re'ada chazatam sham chilka yoleda. The Midrash says, that confrontation is this pasuk. What does the pasuk mean? For behold, the kings assembled, they came together, they saw and were astounded, they were terrified and ran away quickly. Trembling gripped them there, convulsions like a woman in birth pangs, birth travail, giving birth. Okay, how does it make sense? So look what the Midrash says. Ki hinei hamelachim no'adu, behold the kings assembled. Who are the kings? Ze Yehuda veYosef. Avru yachdav, they came together, filled with rage. Ze nitmale evra al ze, veze nitmale evra al ze. This one got upset at this guy was angry at this guy. Hema ra'u ken tamahu, they were terrified and fled in haste. Pasuk says, Vayitmeu anashim ishad re'ehu, each one was terrified. That's everyone around didn't know what was going on, so they started running away like a big war was going to happen. Nivhalu nechpazu, trembling gripped them. This was the brothers. Velo yachelu echav la'anot oto ki nivalu mipanav. They were just, there was a trembling. And what did the brothers say at that moment? A very strange comment. Amru melachim midayanim elu im elu. Anu ma ichpat lanu? Yeila melech midayanim melech. Kings are debating each other. What concern is it of us? It's fitting for a king to confront the king. Everybody ran away because they don't know if a nuclear bomb was going to go off with Yehuda and Yosef. The brothers are saying, leave it alone. You got a king confronting a king. You got a debate going on. Let them talk. This is what's happening at that moment. So says Rav Tzadok HaKohen, Zechutria again Alenu, great tzaddik. He says that Midrash is informing us that the Shevatim were able to see via Ruach HaKodesh that at that moment, that encounter between Yehuda and Yosef was actually an encounter between two Melech HaMashiachs. That's what was happening. On the one hand, we have Melech HaMashiach that descends from Yosef. We call it Mashiach ben Yosef. And we have the Melech Mashiach that descends from Yehuda, Mashiach ben David. And each Mashiach is going to play a unique role in the future Geulah of Israel. And therefore, the brothers saw this. And they said, leave it alone. Melachim medayanim elu im elu. The two Melech HaMashiachs are arguing with each other on how to speed up the Geulah. They're figuring out how to hasten the redemption. Anu ma ichbat lanu. What does it matter to us that they're arguing and they're fighting? Yeila melech medayeni melech. What matters to us that they're redeeming the Jewish people. Let them talk about it. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu orchestrated this encounter between Yehuda and Yosef between the two Mashiachs to occur when? Only after the Shevatim were able to recognize and acknowledge their wrongdoing. Only after the Shevatim said, Aval Ashemim Anachnu, that we are guilty for what we did to our brother Yosef by selling him. When they were trying to rectify the mistake that they did, and they came back to Yosef, only then was Yehuda and Yosef coming together to figure out how the Geulah was going to work. It was also imperative that they bring Binyamin at that moment down to Mitzrayim, to reunite all the 12 Shevatim. So therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu at that moment arranged Yehuda and Yosef to meet and join forces. And that represented this symbolic act, alluding to the fact that only unity, only achdut amongst the brothers will complete the Geulah. The Geulah that's going to be facilitated by Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. And that's why HaKadosh Baruch Hu alluded to Yirmiyahu about only 21 days of Yemei Ben HaMetzarim. Only 21. Because it corresponds only to the 21 years of Yosef where he was by himself with no brothers. Because in year number 22, the brothers came. The brothers came with Binyamin. In the first 21 years, the combinations of Hashem's name were not together. There were not 12 brothers. But in year number 22, when the moment Yehuda and Yosef encountered each other, Vayigash elav Yehuda, everything was put in place. And it alludes to the fact that the Geulah was going to be facilitated by Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. And therefore Tisha Be'Av, which is day number 22 of that set, is not included in the Yemei Ben HaMetzarim. That's the day Mashiach is born. That's the day where Yehuda and Yosef meet and Mashiach sprouts. And with all this, we can rejoice based on what we said at the beginning of the Shi'ur, that peculiar midrash in Devarim that says, Ilu zechitem, had you been meritorious, hayitem korim b'Torah echa esa levadi, then all you would have read every year is the rebuke of Moshe. Echa esa levadi. How can I do it on my own? Ve'achshav shelo zechitem. But now that you did not rebuke, now that you were not meritorious, harei atem korim echa yasheva badad. Now you have to read echa yasheva badad year after year. The pasuk tells us, we read just a few weeks ago in the death of Aharon. Vayiru kol ha'edah ki gava Aharon. The entire congregation saw that Aharon died. Vayivku et Aharon 30 yom kol bet Yisrael. The Jewish people cried for Aharon HaKohen, everyone, for 30 days, the entire house of Israel. And Rashi famously says that everyone grieved over Aharon's death, men and women, because he was the ultimate peacemaker. He was able to forge and bring unity amongst people that were so divided for many years. He promoted peace and amity between disputants, fighters, husbands and wives. Hillel Omer, Heve mitalmidav shel Aharon, Ohev Shalom, Verovdev Shalom, Ohev et HaBerion, Karevan Torah. We have to be students of Aharon who love peace, who promote peace, who love your fellows, bring them closer to Torah. And therefore Moshe Rabbeinu at the end of his life, in the beginning of Parashat Devarim, he doesn't have his brother anymore. He's by himself. Aharon died. This is the last day of Moshe Rabbeinu's life. And he says, Echa esa levadi. How can I do it by myself? I'm not my brother. Torchachem umasachem verivichem. I see your fights. I see your quarrels. I see your burdens. I see what you do just to cause other people trouble, to antagonize others. And I can't do it myself. You need to help me, Jewish people. Echa esa levadi. As long as my brother Aharon was alive, I knew that someone could stand beside me to solve all these fights, to solve all these quarrels amicably, because he loved everyone. He promoted peace. He loved peace. But now that he passed away, I'm levad. Echa esa levadi torchachem umasachem verivechem. And that was the one rebuke he was giving to the Jewish people. Help me. Solve your problems. Stop fighting. So the Midrash says, had you listened to Moshe Rabbeinu, had you listened to what you had to do, had you been meritorious, you'd be reading from the Torah, Echa esa levadi. You'd be reading it as like a note of history. But you would have listened. But now, Ve'achshav shelo zechitem, But seeing that you failed to quash the Yetzer Hara of Sinat Chinam, of baseless hatred, Harei atem korim echa yasheva badad. Now you read Megillat Echa every year, lamenting the Churban of the Bet HaMikdash, which was caused by the sin of Sinat Chinam. Abotai, the remedy of this very regrettable, unfortunate situation is to increase brotherly love among all the 12 Shevatim of the Jewish people, to fulfill the mitzvah taseh ve'ahavta l'recha kamocha. And although we don't all come from 12 Shevatim, we're maybe only 2 or 3, but nevertheless, the 12 Shevatim also represent different types of people. You know, we're all different in many ways, various ways. We have to respect each other that way. We have to love each other no matter what we represent, no matter what our beliefs are, no matter whether we are more on the left side of the political spectrum, the right side of the political spectrum, where we're pro this or anti this, whatever it is. We have to love each other, we have to respect each other. Ish et re'eu ya'azoru ulachiv yomar chazak. In the times of Mashiach, Yeshayahu Navi says that each man would help his fellow, and his brother, he would say, be strong. He would encourage him when he sees him faltering, when he sees him different. He says, chazak. And if we do that, we will succeed in activating the 12 tzirufim, the 12 combinations of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the name of Hashem. And by taking those 12 combinations, we are able to subjugate the 11 forces, the 11 chieftains of Esav, the Alufei Esav. והיה בית יעקב אש, ובית יוסף להבה, ובית עשיו לקש. And by doing so, we will take Yosef, who is the pinnacle of the 12, and he will make that spark. He will burn down all the linen. One spark of Yosef, of Lehava, will burn down Bet Esav Lekash, the house of Esav of straw. That's what we need to work on. That's the only way out of this. And Bezat Hashem, through that riddance of Sinat Chinam, the Ahavat Chinam that will come through it, we will be Zocheh to Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David Beyachad, born on Tisha Be'Av, and we'll be out of this awful galut into the Geulah, time of Mashiach. Amen. Amen.